So I think we're oftentimes raised, especially as women, that our main purpose is to have children. And there's a certain amount of things that you can consider as your purpose in life, which for some people that might be accurate. But my interpretation of purpose is not about us going out and seeking one or two things that we can attach ourselves to.
So, why did I start this podcast? After experiencing miscarriages and going through a challenging period of numbness and anger, I found healing by understanding my emotions, reconnecting with my body, and connecting with my soul, and also my spirit babies. My mission with this podcast is to enter a space of vulnerability and sacredness, of deeply personal stories of women who were impacted by pregnancy loss, miscarriages, stillbirth, and infertility. My goal is to bridge the gap between our losses and the deep spiritual insights that can come with them so that they can guide us toward healing and understanding beyond the physical realm. I'm Daisy May Reyes, and I bring together the wisdom of our wombs as a collective. Welcome to the Women Collective podcast, presented by the Oversoul Vibration. Our guest today is Lana Manikowsky. She's a certified life coach, a keynote speaker, and a passionate infertility activist. After a 7-year fertility journey that ended without a child, Lana created the Others Day Brunch and the So Now What podcast to support women navigating the challenges of childless future. So, Lana, welcome to the show.
I'm so glad to be here. Thanks, Daisy.
You're welcome. Thank you again. So, Lana, without further ado, I would love to learn more about your journey with infertility to start with, and how did it lead you to become a certified life coach that you are now and an infertility activist as well?
Oh, well, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to share my story. For a long time, it was something I couldn't really talk about. And now I feel like I can't talk about it enough because of the need that's out there for women to know that you can create a life that you love, even if you're not able to have the children you dreamed of. So my story started when I was 35. I got married. I was always a very career driven, life enjoyment driven person. And, having children was something that I thought I wanted to have, but I didn't really plan my life around it per se. I thought when I met the right person and I chose to settle down, then we'd start having children. And so for me, that was at age 35 when I got married. And it was maybe, I want to say probably about a year and a half into our marriage. One of my really good friends, she and her husband are close friends of ours, had asked me, are you and Jack thinking about having children? I said, oh, yeah, we've been trying, but nothing yet. And she said, well, listen, I don't want to get too involved, in your personal life, but you might want to think about getting worked up and just, seeing maybe what might be prohibiting you from getting pregnant. And that was honestly, Daisy, the first time that I ever considered that I might need assistance becoming a mom. So that was at 37. I got diagnosed with something called unexplained infertility. And then I started this 7-year journey of trying to become a mom. And it ended up with me never having a pregnancy, having gone through multiple rounds of IUIs and IVF. I had a few embryos here and there, but nothing that ever lasted into a full pregnancy. And I looked at myself in my 40s and wondering, what am I going to be like if I'm not able to be a mom? And that's where my journey ended, without children.
Thank you for sharing that, Lana. And just like you, I share that same infertility journey with you. And I'm sure that a lot of our listeners are also doing the same or having the same experience. So thank you for that. But Lana, may I ask, what was your whole reason and purpose for creating these two podcasts the Other's Day brunch and the So Now What?
Yeah. Well, actually, the first thing you referenced was the Others Day brunch. That's actually an event, an annual event that I do every year. It's an event that I've hosted. This will be our fourth annual event in 2025. And I always host an event in Chicago that's open to anyone who's feeling grief around Mother's Day. It's always the day before Mother's Day. So this coming May, it'll be May 10th, 2025. And women come in from all over the United States, people from outside the states come in for it. And it's really a celebration. It's not a sad event, but it's really an opportunity for women to come together the day before US Mother's Day and celebrate who they are as women. It's also open to women who have lost their mom. Maybe they have an estranged relationship with a mother, or they can't be with their mom on Mother's Day. So that's the Other's Day brunch. And I love that I've been able to create that connection for women, because I know for so long I felt a lot of sadness when Mother's Day would come along. And when I started the Other's Day brunch, I was hopeful that maybe a few people would show up. And I started a meetup group called Childless and Child-Free Women here in Chicago. And lo and behold, like 18 women showed up for the first event, and it's just continued to grow year after year. So that's what the Other's Day brunch is all about. So if anyone listening wants to come in town for it, I'd love to have you. It's a super fun event. You'll meet awesome women who also don't have children. And then the So Now What podcast is a podcast that I started in 2021. I was in the midst of getting my life coach certification, and I met somebody who had a podcast. And, back then it felt like, oh, podcast, you got to be real fancy to have a podcast. And I was encouraged by this woman to tell my story on a podcast. And so that's exactly what I did. So my first podcast episode came out in September of 2021. I'm now 136 episodes in. So I try to get to it almost every week, and just talking about, so now what? And like, what happens when our journey doesn't end up like we thought it was going to? So it's really geared towards women who are childless, not by choice, and trying to navigating life after infertility.
Yes, I love that you create an event the day before Mother's Day. That's wonderful. And even though it started as a small group and now it's growing, and that shows us that there are so many women that do not have children, and they really need such community like that. And so
Yes.
thank you for doing that, especially during Mother's Day week. And I've seen so many posts about on social media, and that they want to avoid Mother's Day altogether. They just want to hide or don't want to even think about or talk about it. And so you doing the Other's Day brunch, it's such an amazing tribute to all of us women, and just having to experience a joy just before we even think about Mother's Day that seemed to doesn't apply to us. But Lana, I want to ask you, with Mother's Day, do women that feels like they don't feel like a mom, is that still very apparent with infertility?
I think that there's a lot of struggle to really find your identity when you have gone through this journey of infertility and not becoming a mom. Seems like the only route to motherhood is through having a biological child. So I think a lot of women who leave fertility treatments or know that they're never going to be able to have a biological child really struggle with, is a mom always, am I ever going to identify as a mom if I haven't had my own biological child? So is being a godmother, is that a good enough thing? Being a pet parent, is that a good enough thing? Being an aunt and active in, your niece or nephew's life. So I think a lot of women who have infertility do struggle with identifying as a mother. Maybe they feel as though they're giving that love, but I think it's more so the judgment that they think other people have of them, that other people don't see them as mothers. So that sort of pinches off this flow of energy and this flow of love that you have to give, these maternal instincts and this maternal love to people that aren't biologically yours.
Can you clarify that a little bit, Lara, with the identification of being a mom? Is that a high percentage of women who suffered infertility that couldn't identify as a mom? And also, do they even want to be identified as a mom, or do they believe that are they a mom even when it never occurred, the process of the whole pregnancy term?
Well, I think from what I've seen, and this is, I'm just speaking about the women that I've had the good fortune of working with, they struggle with identifying as a purposeful and meaningful figure as a woman because they haven't been able to biologically have a child. However, so many people see them as valuable, meaningful, purposeful, but it's hard to see yourself as that when society tells you that the only way to achieve that is through biological motherhood. So I think a lot of women do struggle with that identification of being a mom because they haven't been able to check that box that they birthed a child. And it's really pinching them off from this love and this purpose that they create through being that and being this giver of love to so many people.
Yes, and I agree with the judgment of self. And it seems that that is stemming with the cause of not being able to accept our role as a woman in society. And so, with your work as a life coach, how do you approach bridging the gap between societal expectations of the role of women and then also the women that you're working with trying to fit in that box of that identity of that or that purposeful role as a woman?
Yeah. Well, I think it's really important for we as women to understand that we have the authority to define who we are. And I think a lot of us have been raised or been accustomed to believe that there's this checklist that you have to meet in order to classify yourself as something. And when you don't see yourself being able to match up with what society tells you a woman should be or what they should do or what they should have accomplished, you really shortchange yourself from identifying, like, is that really what you want? I think that, first and foremost, I work with my students to understand, like, what's the story that you're telling yourself about you? And is that story one that you like hearing? When you talk about yourself or when you tell someone about your fertility journey or that you don't have children and how you got to that point in life, does the story make you feel proud of who you are or does it diminish who you are? So I think it's really important to understand what's that story you're telling about yourself, and is it accurate? Are those really factual pieces of information anymore? I think as we grow as people and we continue to evolve as women, we oftentimes are trying to chase something that's no longer part of who we are anymore. And I think it's really important to redefine at this point in my life, Lana at age 50, am I really trying to chase something that I want anymore? Or is it something that I've just been so used to chasing and it's not really something that's part of my desire anymore, but society has told me that I should keep going after this thing. So reframing, what are your goals? And are those the things that you really in your heart of hearts desire? And then, deciding, okay, if this is something that I can't have or no longer feel called to do with my life, what is it that I want? And I think we get to this point where we think, oh, I'm too old to dream. I'm too old to want something new. And there's just so much brilliance as women that we can create when we continuously reinvent ourselves. And for me, I didn't find out I wasn't going to be a mom until I was in my mid 40s. And I could have spent the rest of my life being like, oh, well, I could live life at 80%, or I could say, okay, now that I know I'm not going to be a mom, what is it that I want with my life? who do I want to be and what do I want to achieve? So that's really what I try to work with my students and help them get to that point in their life.
Thank you so much, Lana. And with many women who are your students, and they are in that group of the infertility pool, many of these women they face insensitive or intrusive comments and questions about their situation, especially about being without child. What advice do you give them on how to handle those comments, especially adding grace to that while also maintaining their emotional well-being?
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought that up because I literally just created a free resource that I sent out on my website, but it's called the top 27 things people say when you're childless and how to respond. Because, and maybe you'll link it in the show notes. I can send you the link if it will be helpful, because that's one of the most common things is when you say are in the corporate world or you're going to an event, a networking event, and you're meeting someone for the first time. It's so common that the first thing people ask you are, how many kids do you have? And when you don't have children, it could be very off-putting because you're like, none. And then, you get people doing that. I'm so sorry. Or, oh my goodness, like, oh, how terrible. And it's this automatic feeling like you're less than. So I think it's really important to be prepared with how do you want to answer those types of questions. So that's why I created that resource, because I know for so long I felt like at a loss for words when people would tell me, oh, you can have my kids, or, kids aren't all what they're cracked up to be. So I think it's really important when somebody asks you that question, which, I'd love to eliminate that question from the world, but it's clearly not going to happen. So what we can do is decide, what are we thinking about ourselves? When somebody asks that question, like, what is your brain automatically telling you about you? You're an outsider. People don't, you don't relate to other people. You're different than most women. So recognizing, like, are those the things that you want to lead with in those conversations? But as you do this work, and the students that I work with, we get really clear on when somebody asks you that question, if you're getting embarrassed or you're getting shameful of it, how can you reframe that story? How can you become proud of the fact that, no, I don't have children, or I wanted to have children at one time, and it just wasn't in the cards for me. So understanding what comes up in your brain when those questions come up, how do you want to respond? And how do you want to respond maybe in a way that is simply like a no, I don't, period? Or is it, oh, I'm so glad you asked. Just so you know, not every woman is able to have children. And then I'll sometimes go into an explanation of what infertility is, because we maybe know so much about it, but there's so many people in the world that don't realize that there's women who are unable to biologically have children. So deciding, like, is this a good educational moment? Maybe this person is like, oh my gosh, like, I've had people be like, thank you so much for sharing. I didn't even recognize that would be such a triggering question for people. So deciding if it's something you want to educate people with. Do you want to just keep it simple and a simple no? Do you want to, go on and share your story? I find the more comfortable you become with your story and who you are as a contributor in this world without children, sometimes it feels really good and empowering to tell people your story when you come at it from a sense of pride and a sense of accomplishment for who you are as a woman.
That's right. We have to start learning to own our story. And because it's a very empowering feeling to really stand on that space where we know who we are, where we came from, and how we really push through, those experiences. And so I love that share, Lana. Do you also explain to your students that it starts with self-awareness as well, as far as understanding where the other people might be coming from as to why they have explained or expressed those comments? Like, for example, like in my culture, in in the Philippines, we are always expected like to have a big family. And I think my father's side have a history of barren women. So my aunts, a lot of my aunts, they never had children. And that kind of like, I'm the one of those mix in that bag. And so, we're always, whenever I attend to parties, they will always tell me, when are you going to have children? When are you going to get married again? Or, it's a very insensitive remark, but I know where they're coming from because they do not understand our story and they do not have that knowledge. So how do you explain to your students that, you know, instead of maybe feeling bad about that person, that, oh, they are so insensitive, they shouldn't have said that. How would you advise turning it around to where, maybe that person just didn't have that knowledge about our story. So, maybe all we can do is maybe just educate them and help them see it from themselves and maybe raise their self-awareness. So like, how do you let your students know that it is what it is, how they say it, because it's really not also their fault that they say it in a very insensitive way.
I think that whole back to whether it's self-compassion or compassion for others is recognizing, and that's why I love the education piece of what I teach people, because a lot of times people grow up in cultures where they don't know women who don't have children, or if somebody, doesn't have a child, adoption is an automatic thing that people do. And so just understanding that just like our story is unique, like people are coming from a place that they've seen as their norm. And instead of being upset with someone or being disappointed by somebody, the greatest thing that you can do is own your story, like you said, and feel so comfortable with who you are as a person and proud of who you are as a person that love radiates from you when somebody asks the question, like you want to help them understand instead of being angry at them for not knowing. So just approaching everything from a sense of love, because I truly believe when people ask these questions, they're not trying to be hurtful. They're not trying to, put a dagger in that spot, and that's, been such a wound for us for so long. So if I know that coming into a conversation with somebody that I want to approach our conversation with love, how can I respond with love as well?
That's right. That's right. It's more about self-compassion, just like you said, and approaching it with love, and also understanding that, that's all they knew. They don't know anything about our circumstance, and owning our story, just like we both mentioned, is a way to start, you know, showing compassion towards ourselves and also to other people who may we judge like they're insensitive, but really that's not their intention, right? We
Correct.
we we look at it at that different view now, where they're not really insensitive, they're not really hurtful, they have good heart by saying that, but it just come across as if insensitive to us, and it's very personal because it does feel like a dagger being stabbed to us, but it wasn't their intention because that's all they knew. They only knew what they know. And us coming from compassion will help kind of like break that barrier and also judgment,
Yeah.
right?
And maybe
Yeah.
even if I could just add one more thing, maybe even preface with, I'm sure you probably don't realize that this is a really hard thing for me to talk about. And
Right.
when you preface your answer with that, I think that allows people to open their ears a little bit more instead of feeling like, oh my gosh, like I was attacking this if you come back at them with a real snippy answer, which, of course, if you're at that place in your journey and that feels right to you, like I'm not here to direct people to a place that they're not ready for. But when you get to a point that you can respond with this is a really hard thing for me to talk about, but I'd love to share it with you so you know dot, 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 and then finish from there. I think that's a really lovely way to answer.
Right, like answering it in a very graceful manner to where their response will also be replied to with grace. So there's
Yes.
no like a boxing match.
Right. Because I
Right.
used to be at that point where I would get really snippy when someone asked me, because I just wasn't at a point where I felt comfortable with who I was as a woman without children. And it was more of a sparring match than an opportunity to have a conversation.
Right. And I'm glad that we're having this conversation because many women do feel it as if an attack in their space when really, they are coming from a place of just wanting to empathize, but they just don't know how to. And that's where you come in and with your resource to help build that ways to respond to those kind of comments. So
Yes.
thank you for putting that together.
Yeah. No, and I'm glad we talked about it. So I'll make sure I'll share the link with you and you can share it with your listeners if you'd like, because it's a common thing that comes up. And I think a lot of us don't have the ability to comfortably speak about it.
Yes, thank you so much. So I was reading your bio and you mentioned that your coaching frame, your work helps women rediscover joy and purpose. So can you walk us through some of those key elements of this framework?
Yeah, well, I have a very unique perspective on purpose. Not a lot of people, when I tell people about my way of looking at purpose, I sort of see like these light bulbs go off. So I think we're oftentimes raised, especially as women, that our main purpose is to have children. And there's a certain amount of things that you can consider as your purpose in life, which for some people that might be accurate. But my interpretation of purpose is not about us going out and seeking one or two things that we can attach ourselves to. I think that when you are comfortable with who you are and you are proud of who you are and you show up in this world just genuinely being you, your purpose gets created for you. Your purpose it could be something different to 30 different people because there are such a unique quality that each of us have that resonates with that one person. And really, when I came up with this idea of how purpose is created, that we don't create it and we don't identify it for ourselves, I thought about my second grade teacher who taught me how to do math. And I still remember, like, I could describe her to a T. And I thought about, that purpose that I know how to do math has lasted me my lifetime. Now, she probably was a mom. Actually, I do know she was a mom. She had children at home, and her purpose to her kids was different than teaching them math. And so it just made me realize that who you are as a person doesn't have to have one singular definition. And it became so much more like, oh, thank goodness. Like, I don't have to search this world to say, oh, this is my purpose and this is going to be my purpose forever. So that's sort of my perspective on purpose. And I also think that, if you are someone who maybe has a profession or something that really brings you a ton of joy and you want to call that your purpose, go at it. Like, I'm not here to tell you not to do that, but also know that your purpose can change too. It doesn't have to be that one thing forever. Because I think some women, when they find out that they're not going to be a mom, they get something that I like to call paralysis by analysis, right? Because they're like, well, what can I say or what can I attach myself to that sounds purposeful and like big enough to call my purpose? And when you let yourself be like, oh, your purpose can change every day. The things, you do and what you're known for in this world, you don't have to define that. It doesn't have to be, that attached, you don't have to attach yourself to it so much. So I hope I answered your question. I feel like I got off on a tangent a little bit talking about purpose, but when I realized that you don't always have to have one purpose, it became much more easy for me to think about my future and what I wanted to accomplish.
Yes, I love that. And actually, it's going to lead to my next question to you, Lana, because I feel that with women who are in the infertility roller coaster, they are always wanting to create a vision for themselves, like a future. but they don't know how. So with your framework about redesigning and rediscovering their future and purpose, or joy and purpose, like how do you show them how to create a life that they truly love, and create that vision? And also, what steps do you help them take to redefine that future and create that meaning and purpose in
Yeah.
their new life?
Well, the coaching program that I teach, it's called Thrive After Infertility. There's three main, I guess you would say, platforms of my program. So it's relationships. So it could be a relationship to a partner, a spouse, your familial relationships, relationships with your friends with kids. So really feeling as though you have a place in this world and your relationships are defined, that you're proud of who you are and how you show up in those relationships. The second one is body image. So a lot of us who aren't able to have children have suffered a long time being angry with our bodies, that they wouldn't be able to do what we thought that they were supposed to do as a cis female. And then understanding what it is, how can you be proud of your body? How can you recreate a relationship with your body where you forgive your body and, go through certain exercises that I teach, especially like in the pelvic region, how to sort of become connected again with your pelvis and this area that brought you a lot of emotional turmoil for many of us. And then the third one is, I call it owning your time and how you spend your time. What are the things that you're doing with your time, and are you happy doing the things that you're doing? So really understanding when you feel the most ease in your life, when you feel happy, when you feel free, like what are the activities that you're doing, and how can you find more ways to incorporate that into your life, and really feeling proud of what you do during the weekend, because our weekends look much different than weekends with people with kids. And so when you come to work on Monday and someone's talking about, well, I took my kid to soccer and then they had this tournament and that tournament and 2 birthday parties and da 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 da, and they're like, how's your weekend, Lana? And you're like, it was good. Like I did yoga and, my husband and I went for dinner, and you talk about these things, but then sometimes you're like, wow, are the things I'm doing, like, does that feel meaningful? Like, do I really own my time? And do I feel proud of the fact that I'm happy with what I'm doing? And it's not a comparison to what Susan had to do with her, 4 kids on the weekends. So what I work on with my students are kind of 3 areas, those 3 pillars of my program, to help you feel more connected to who you are. Because when you find out that you're not going to be a mom, the future can feel really heavy, because you're like, how am I going to fill the next, say, 40, 50 years of my life? I thought I was going to be a mom, and I thought my milestones in my life were going to be attached to the milestones my children would be going through. So sometimes women feel very paralyzed about where to even start getting their life to feel like it's theirs again, because this blank canvas is in front of you. So how do we take that blank canvas and paint this beautiful picture that feels really good to us, and we're excited to live these next 40 or 50 years of our life?
Yes, thank you for that, Lana. And if our listeners want to learn more about this Thrive After Infertility, is that the program?
Yes. Uh-huh.
If they would like to check it out, how can they find you, and how they can
So on my website, lanamanikowski.com, there's a spot that says work with me, or you can go to lanamanikowski.com/thrive, THRIVE, and you can learn all about it there. But it's a beautiful 12-week program, and it's a small group program because it's really important for me to give women the opportunity to connect with each other on more of a personal level. And we meet weekly, and the women that are in there are really women that want to grow beyond their infertility. And that takes a while to get there, because I have an advanced certification in grief and post-traumatic growth. And I think it's important that women give themselves a little bit of time to feel the heaviness and the sadness that they're feeling about not becoming a mom. And we've become the society that wants like quick fixes. And I don't think, for me at least, this is the way that I view it. I don't know that I would have been able to grow in my life if I didn't know what I was wanting to grow from. You know, there was so much sadness and so much grief that I had when I found out that I couldn't become a mom. And I wanted to find this life that felt like fulfilling. But I don't think you can get there unless you kind of have sat in the lows of what it feels like. And I think as a society, a lot of times we're just always seeking the feeling better. And part of the journey is understanding what it's like to not feel great as well.
That's right. Everybody in today's society, we just want that easy fix. Like we want to have the answers now in front of us. And
Yeah.
it's not always an easy route that gets us to where our desired future will be, because there's a process that needs to happen. There's also layers that we have to undergo, and we have to face, our deepest shadows, which is grief. And just like you said, it has to be processed, and it can take, you know it may not be an easy task, but when the end result is reached and achieved, I feel that that's where we kind of like that's where we can start owning our own story, just like
Yeah.
we spoke about. So thank
Yes.
you for that, Lana.
Yes.
So, Lana, do you have any future plans or projects that you're excited about in your current work? And how do you envision continuing to support and inspire all these women who are facing the similar challenges?
Yeah. Well, one of my dreams is growing the Others Day, that it becomes this huge weekend of healers coming in and women coming from all over the world. So that's like I see that in my dreams so much, of like filling this big ballroom in a hotel of women who are just excited about living life without children. And as far as my goals go, and as far as my, growing my practice and the coaching work that I do, I think a lot of it is just continuing to show up and tell my story. Because I think for so long, women without children have stayed silent because we're really embarrassed of where we are or what we've tried and hasn't worked for us, and that we don't have children, that so many women stay silent. And I hear, women will tell me, or they'll listen to my podcast and they'll send me a message and be like, "You're the first person I've ever heard tell my story through your story." And to be able to allow a woman to feel recognized and feel as though she's seen in this world after staying, silent and hidden for so long, is to me one of the greatest blessings that's been given to me through my infertility and my inability to have a child. Because I love to create connections for women, and I'm hoping to just continue doing that by telling my story and showing up as somebody who's proud of what her life turned out to be, even though it didn't include motherhood.
So, what are your final message for us women, or a reflection that you'd like to leave to our listeners, especially those that are dealing with infertility and navigating a childless future?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to understand that you can learn how to love your life even if it turns out differently than you thought it would. And I think I said that earlier on. Like, I think we've continued to chase this idea of what life was supposed to be like. And when it doesn't match up with our reality of where it ended up, you can live your life at this 80% mark. Like, oh, it's good, but it's not great. So understanding that you're worth living a life that feels really good to you, and that you can feel proud of who you are, even if you don't see a ton of people around you that have a story that looks like yours. I also see and hope women understand that it's okay to seek resources. I know when I finished my fertility treatments, I went to multiple clinics here in the United States and some of the best in the world. And I got zero resources on my last visit with my doctor. There was no recommendation for a therapist. There was no recommendation for a coach, even another woman that I could call and talk to who had been down this journey. So I felt so alone and so isolated. And I don't want women to think that they have to live their life like that too. So calling someone that, at the doctor's office and asking for those resources, maybe they might have them, but most of them, they don't provide that as like a continuum of care to their patients. So if you see something online or hear a podcast like yours or a podcast like mine, take the chance of just reaching out to somebody who looks like maybe they're living a life that you want to learn more about, because it's possible for you too. And just because your journey didn't end with a child, believe that like life is still going to be so preciously beautiful for you, but you have to raise your hand and say, hey, I need help, or I want to learn more. So I think it's really what I would want to leave here as my final message with you.
Beautiful message, Lana. Again, thank you for being on the show, and thank you for sharing us your insights. And I would love to share all the resources that you have and the links to your upcoming Others Day brunch and also your podcast. So
Okay.
I think
Well, thank you so much, Daisy. It's beautiful. And I'm so fortunate to and share my story with your listeners.
yes, thank you again, Lana. Thank you, everyone, for listening to the Woman Collective podcast. I truly hope that you found this conversation meaningful and valuable. If you like what you heard today and if you would like to hear more, please go ahead and click the subscribe button below.